the one I keep going back to, and I keep mulling this stuff over, is the show The Boys, which I know you haven't seen. I'm not sure if it's your sort of show.
No.
It's very much a me sort of show.
Yeah.
So, but there's a really horrific graphic fridging in the first episode with Huey's first girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, because Huey's played by Jack Quaid, so it gives you a sense of what kind of guy Huey is. He's very every guy, right? He's not he's very wily, it turns out, but he's not hyper, like, book smart intelligent. He's not ambitious. He's got a lot of issues. But the only thing that could believably push him into the world of Billy Butcher and this doomed to fail attempt, this David versus Goliath super anti-hero story, is something that earth-shattering, because they actually show the whole buyout thing where they try to pay him off for, it was collateral damage, here's a check, we're very sorry for your loss. And his attempts to process it and just going, this is wrong, this is really wrong, this is like, what, is really the only thing that I could see a guy like that just going so unglued that he would end up doing what he does. I have been trying to figure out how you bring Huey into that world and into that story and into the choices he makes without the fridging of his girlfriend, and I just can't.
And that's the thing. Sometimes, like, it's an overused trope, because, like I said, with comic books and with soap operas, it's okay, well, we've done everything, what do we do? Well, here's an evil clone, here's an evil twin, here's a new Kryptonian, here's this or that, because they've done, you need something to make it interesting.
Well,
and so these traits have been overused, like amnesia.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean you can't tell a good story with those things.
It was also the thing that bothers me about, it was the which Superman movie was it? The one where he fights Zod. The Michael Shannon Zod, not Superman 2. Where they're knocking each other into buildings.
Oh, Man of Steel.
Man of Steel. And I'm like, aren't there people in those buildings? It was the same problem I had. And they, every Whedon Adventures movie, they had to go back and fix the fact that the likely, imperilment of innocence in those movies were off the charts. Sokovia, okay, that was retroactively, yes, a very bad thing. But even the fighting in Manhattan, if you've ever been to Manhattan, there are so many people there. It's an ant farm of people. There's no way only a few dozen people died in that fight. And so to use the emotional weight to show that collateral damage in those things actually matters, that those, what did they reduce it to, like 82 people or something like that happened in that fight at the end of the first Avengers movie?
82 was the number of people who died in the Shield complex in the beginning.
Okay. So they actually show the story of one of those people through Huey and the boys. And it's like, yeah, this is not just collateral damage. This actually matters. And so there's an example of something that was actually making a commentary on something superhero movies, I think, should take more care of. Like, why aren't the heroes, the way Superman does in stories, actually pulling the battle away from mass casualty events quite so much? Why did the Avengers put their headquarters in the middle of New York? That's a guaranteed way to maximize casualties if a supervillain attacks it.
Yeah. And eventually they moved it out into the country.
Yeah, eventually they moved it out into upstate New York. Yeah. And then that got demolished. Like, what was Tony Stark thinking? But, yeah, they did it through a fridge. But
and like it's one thing, like there's the difference between the big heroes and the street level heroes. I don't know what the name for the big ones is, but you've got the street level heroes like Spider-Man, like Daredevil,
right,
who they're actively involved in their community and they're trying to help in the small ways.
right.
And so it's one thing for the street level heroes to be on the streets of Manhattan. It's a whole other, like at least Teen Titans Tower is on an island away from San Francisco.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's San Francisco, at least in the cartoon.
Yeah.
I think it is. So it's, yeah. And like people complained about, oh, why did he break Zod's neck? Aside from the fact that I watched that movie the day before I went to a chiropractor appointment. So that actually happened twice in a row because I also watched Pompeii with Kit Harington, only because of Kit Harington. That movie is awful. And he breaks a horse's neck in that. And then the next day I went to a chiropractic appointment. So the guy put his hands on my neck and I'm like, oh shit. And then the same thing happened a couple months later after seeing Man of Steel.
Jeez.
Yeah, I watch weird movies. So it's like, him breaking Zod's neck doesn't bother me as much as all those buildings and all those people. It's like, it does explain why Bruce decided, okay, this guy's a threat, but it's also like, you have really bad threat perception.
Yeah.
And you're really bad at reading a room if you think he was the problem here.
Exactly. That whole thing just didn't, that whole Batman versus Superman thing. And I know some people love that movie, but there were so many logicals in that whole thing. And okay, all those ethical concerns about Superman, and I mean, this is another fridge problem. All those ethical issues with what Superman's doing and the existence of Superman go away because your mom's had the same name. Fuck? Like that changes nothing.
Yeah.
The reasons you're a threat does not change the fact that you're a threat. What the fuck? I mean, yes, Bruce Wayne is something of a narcissist. Yeah. But that was not for me at least, that was not the poignant moment it was intended to be.
There's a reason it's become a meme.
Yeah, but
because it's so ridiculous.
But when that movie first came out, and this is the other thing about fridging, I do believe it's intended to push cheap emotional buttons in men.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna get so many pick-me girls over this because I'm just calling them as I see them. People who see my Twitter feed, people who see my other content, I will call out sexism against women when I see it. And you could argue that this is a form of, imbalance because it treats the male audience as not just the one it's for, but the only one that's important. There is a lack of consideration of how it's going to land in women.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think She-Hulk was something of a reaction to that. But the fact that it was so, let's just make guys think about their mamas, it was so cheap.
Yeah.
It was just so cheap. And I admit this is something I struggle increasingly with Batman. With all his money and all his access to resources and all his martial arts training, he still hasn't gotten closure on the death of his parents. After he's seen so many other people's loved ones die, in part because he won't just off the fucking Joker. He still can't get over his own damage?
At some point, by letting the Joker go, the blood of the people the Joker kills is on Batman's hands.
Absolutely. Because the Joker is who the Joker is.
It's the same with the revolving door that is Arkham.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's like, it's not even just Batman at this point. It's the entire city,
which
makes sense because it's corrupt. Now, I like the idea that a friend suggested the idea that like there's an evil wizard buried under Gotham from centuries ago, and that's why everything is corrupted.
Oh, they did that in one of the games. It was a Ra's al Ghul Lazarus pit.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like the idea that, and I even like the idea, like the idea that the Joker is an entity and it's a spirit that possesses people. Like, this is me being a bit spiritual. Like,
well, that was sort of what they did in the Joaquin Phoenix movie.
That makes sense, because there's an episode of the original Star Trek series where Jack the Ripper is the spirit that possesses people. Mm-hmm. And it's like, people laugh at that episode, but I'm like, that's actually a really interesting concept. That, and maybe it's because I like those kind of stories. I'm like, that's interesting. And so then I heard the idea of, well, what if the Joker was a spirit, basically?
It's a metaphor for social contagion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind seeing something like that. Just the idea of Gotham as a living entity, kind of like there's the movie Curse of the Batwomen, I think it's called, and the Penguin makes a joke, Batman, Batgirl, Batwomen, what is it? Is there something in the water?
Yeah.
And I heard that line and I'm like, well, that would actually make sense because Gotham is nuts. So the idea just kind of expanded from there. I'm like,
I mean, the 89 Batman film tried to tie it into the 80s crime wave in New York. And there is something to be said for, you know, in a world where these very powerful people are brawling it out on the streets. I mean, you think people feel powerless now to control their destinies. Can you imagine that?
Yeah. And one of the biggest things is it's like, why does anyone still live in Gotham?
Because they have to. They can't afford to move.
Yeah. Still, I feel like you find a way.
Yeah, like they live there.
Bad as Gotham is.
That's basically the explanation for why people don't move the hell out of Gotham. Because
you
can see, why didn't people move out of New York? Well, for one, you know, the rich people pay for private security. It's not the same problem for them, and they're all corrupt.
Yeah.
But the little people, the regular people, they don't have economic freedom of movement. And this is all, you know, this is all stuff that's been grafted on to stories that have existed since like Batman was created in the 40s.
Yeah.
So a lot of this stuff is sort of, you know, a posteriori explanation. But it does, I mean,
and, you know, really quick, getting back to my whole comic books or soap operas thing,
right?
I would argue that before comic books, the old pulps were, I say this
absolutely.
Specifically, it was soap operas for men.
Well, one could obviously argue
hashtag
pulps pre-exist. Pulps predate the soap operas.
Well,
the soap operas would be pulps.
True. So, and I think you did have pulps aimed at men and pulps aimed at women.
Well, it's kind of funny though, because the reason they're called soap operas is this goes back to actual opera, and the stories in opera are ridiculous.
Yeah,
but they're seen as high art.
Well, I mean, do you know how much breath control that singing takes?
Well, yeah, but that's not art so much as that is, my opera singer friends are going to kill me. That part is not so much art as it is physical prowess. But I mean, if you look at the plots of operas, they are absurd, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, what do you say, Song, that something doesn't have to be smart to be art, or
something doesn't have to be deep to be art?
There you go. And opera's a shining example of that, right? It's these overwhelming emotional states.
Yeah. I mean, I've said my favorite writer is Robert E. Howard, and a lot of people dismiss him like, oh, he was a pulp writer. Okay, but he was good.
Oh, God. Reading those old pulps, they were well written. I mean, the command of language is better than a best-selling novel today.
just have to tell this story because it's something that frustrates me incredibly, and I think you'll understand. I took a college English class once, and we had to read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And when I did my final report on it, one thing I talked about was this writing sucks. Like, this is amateur writing. There is literally a scene where the dialogue is, well, as you know, so-and-so, I'm better at doing this. And I'm like, this is textbook bad writing.
Yeah.
The professor docked me points for it and said, well, it was a bestseller, so I guess you're wrong about it being bad writing. And I'm like,
appeal to popularity.
That doesn't make it good. And it's like, you teach English. I could teach English better than you can, buddy.
That's fallacious. That's a fallacious argument. Just because something's popular doesn't mean it's good.
Twilight.
Well, yeah.
Harry Potter, for that matter.
Though, I mean, like, let's face it, Twilight was a story from the perspective of the woman in the refrigerator.
I find it interesting that, so back in 2020, I think it was, Stephanie Meyer released Midnight Sun, which is Twilight from Edward's perspective.
Yeah.
And one of the book reviewers I follow said Edward was even worse than we thought. And it's like, it makes him even creepier. And part of it was because Meyer, one, didn't self-edit, and two, tried to explain things that didn't need to be explained.
Right.
Like, we don't need to know how their digestive system works.
Oh, that's right. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's some things, and a lot of writers don't understand. If you don't want to address something, just don't mention it.
Yeah.
Now, there's some things which will become a plot hole, but if it's a tiny thing like where do they go to the bathroom, you don't need to cover that.
Well, it's also what are the vampire magic?
Yeah.
Like, it's vampire magic. Blood is life essence. It just absorbs completely. Vampires don't need to take a shit. Problem solved. Break for lunch.
And I think when you try to take the magic out of those fantasy elements, you end up with those issues where
I completely agree.
You're trying to explain it, and it's like, no, don't explain it.
Because magic, move on. That's the purpose of magic. Yeah. Magic is science unexplained. Don't explain it. Right.
Exactly.
And that's not the same as the rules for magic. I think part of the reason that J.K. Rowling did so well with Harry Potter is she had very good rules for magic that, of course, she broke. By book 5, pretty much everything was freaking broken. All the fancy words that they had to learn perfectly. Oh, no, oops, not necessarily silent casting is a thing. Whoopsie. But, I mean, talk about fridges there. How many fucking characters die for Harry?
So many.
Like, his mom, his dad, his like adoptive father sort of thing, or his other male role model. The other male role model, his favorite teacher, his least favorite teacher, his imaginary friend, his pet, like, it just, one of his best friend's brothers, it just goes on and on.
Which imaginary friend?
Dobby.
Oh.
I mean, it's the equivalent of the imaginary friend for a kid, right? I had this whole routine with my nieces and nephews because they were distraught with Harry Potter, especially that last book. So we did a whole Harry Potter in therapy. And it was, tell me about your mother. She's dead. Okay. Your father. She's dead. Your best friend. Oh, he's still around, but his brother died. Okay. Any any other family members? Well, there's Sirius. Oh, what about him? Dead. And then there's Lupin. He's dead too. And
he's dead. His wife is dead.
Your favorite teacher, who was your mentor growing up? Oh, Dumbledore. Yeah, he's dead. And then, okay, who's your least favorite teacher? Oh, yeah, Snape. Let me guess. Yep, dead. And eventually at the end of it, we just went through all of it. Like, did you have a favorite stuffed toy? Well, I had a house elf. Oh, okay. What about him? Dead. You know, did you have a pet? Yes, my owl Hedwig. Dead. You know, and the kids are laughing by the end. And eventually the punchline of the whole thing is, out of my office, I cannot help you. Right. And it was a cope for all the fridging. And that's why I think it's funny that, you know, the damsel in distress, women in refrigerator, these are supposed to be these terrible tropes that men do to women. And if we had more female writers, we wouldn't see these tropes so much. Whoops, J.K. Rowling says you're wrong, feminist. She went all those places.
Okay, here's the thing. I was watching there's a book review channel I like, and it's like a podcast with a group of 2 or 3 reviewers. And they pointed out that they'd read like 4 books in a row, all written by women, all with main female characters, where a friend, sister, or sister stand-in died to trigger their pain and thus start the story.
Or is endangered, or they're trying. I mean, the Hunger Games fits there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was 4 books in a row specifically where a sister character died.
Yeah.
And usually it was like right at the beginning or right before. And so tell me again how this is a sexist trope. No, this is not a sexist trope. This is a weak writing point that authors who don't know how to genuinely build emotion and make you care for the character rely on to try and get an emotional gut punch instead of putting in the effort to actually develop the character.
Well,
and develop the story.
And let's face it, it is an external motivator, right? It isn't ambition. It isn't a desire to change the world. It isn't anything that could be seen as hubris or arrogant. It's a reaction.
Yeah.
And that makes it... Sorry, go ahead.
Generally, when it comes to stuff like pulps and comics, I don't expect things to be really high level. I understand that this is commercial art. It doesn't need to be deep. Sometimes you go for the emotional gut punch. But there is a difference between doing it poorly and doing it well. And when it comes to novels, like even if it's young adult, I have a slightly higher standard.
Except again, then you get into like Marvel in the late 70s and early 80s, and you read Marvel in the 60s and it was dumb shit, man. Like try to explain Billy and Tommy in the 60s, like what it just happened, right? Oh, they got kids. Don't think about it. But then they got into those real social commentary stories, and they were gripping. Like everything was a little lighter back then, right? But by the standards of the time, holy shit, that Iron Man alcoholism arc went deep.
Yeah.
It was like they were at least, and they're doing that now, right? They're trying, and yet
I think it does come back to, you know, we talked before about how the people who write these stories are too weak to write the characters as being truly strong. And I think that's part of the problem. It's also, you know, you mentioned it's the idea of the warrior versus someone who's just a hero.
Yeah.
And we don't understand so much the concept of the warrior anymore.
Yeah. And so somebody who you talk to guys and women who have been in the military, and it isn't the, you know, I'm fighting for a cause. It was, I like the structure.
Yeah. And I also think there's a difference between someone like Conan, who is a warrior born and bred, versus a soldier who follows orders. Oh, we know Conan doesn't follow orders very well.
There is also a big difference between somebody who has exceptional abilities and feels a responsibility to use them for good instead of evil, and somebody whose, you know, draft number came up and is just trying to get through their tour.
Yeah.
And I do think that those, okay, who is this guy? Because you have to figure out, or gal, whatever, you have to figure out who they are before they're going to react to stimulus.
Yeah.
And so that whole, well, anybody would be upset. I think it would be pretty funny if, you know, and they did this a little bit in The Boys with a Homelander scene that, you know, they did the whole thing. I'm going to kill the woman you love. Ha, 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 ha. And it does
Homelander doesn't love anyone.
Well, even I know that. What's interesting is in the moment, he eliminates the weakness, and it's very shocking. But as it goes on, part of the reason he unspools is because no, he actually did care. And the fact that that show has to be so over the top, violent, gross, hero-gasm, screwing octopi, a guy with a giant schlong named Love Sausage, they have to do all of that to really do some really deep character work. And it's the same thing I see in Thor Love and Thunder, that you have to throw all this shit at the wall to adult in media. And that's why I think that it's important to not just dismiss sexism. To me, is not a reason in art. A sexist trope is not a reason. It's a canary in a coal mine. Because authors don't wake up one day and go, I'm going to be sexist or I'm going to be racist, right?
No.
It's more like something like the Netflix Sandman, where they thought, we're going to be more diverse. We're going to include more people of color, more women. And so Dream's primary servant ends up being a Black slave. Right? It just gets lost along the line because they're not thinking about what they're doing. We need to give this hero a motivation. And instead of making it something intrinsic, something they want to do, and, may have resulted in a mistake, they just make it reactive. Because if it's reactive, if it's not their fault, then they're blameless and they don't have to struggle with moral ambiguity or how, more importantly, to fix a mistake which is what these emotionally stunted creators don't know how to do. That's exactly the writing box they don't know how to get their way out of. And that's why I think the fridgings happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had to clean up a really bad mistake you've made in your life, like something that actually did wreck your life, and you have to figure out how to pick up the pieces and move on. And you realize it may not have been totally your fault, but it was at least 60% your fault. Right?
Yeah.
That's
if
hard.
You just said something.
What's that?
If you had just said something, things could have been very different.
And if you had just taken a moment, right? If you just taken a minute and gotten yourself together before you opened your mouth, or if you just, these are things we don't get do-overs in life. We have to go on. And there are people that are going to think you're evil forever. And I mean, I have a unique welcome to this world song. Even when you don't do certain things, when you're on YouTube and you get any sort of profile, whatever, people graft shit onto you. and like with you, with the I could have healed from this with Thor Love and Thunder. For me, that was the Loki show, right? Because okay, here's a guy, MCU canon right now is he fridged Coulson. This is the dude that killed the Avengers mascot. And I thought that was stupid. It was the reason the Avengers were brought together, but it didn't really make any sense. Right.
And here's the thing. I was thinking about it, and it's because of that, the Avengers don't do it because it's the right thing to do.
Well, they do it for selfish reasons.
Which, God, that's so cynical.
It's awful.
It's kind of gross.
It's really awful. Gross, actually.
And
that of all the people that Thor and Loki killed together, I mean, they then retroactively showed them like they were the fucking shit. Some major historical event. The guy that jumped out of the plane, the successful hijacking. They claimed that was a prank Thor and Loki did together. It's just a weird retcon there that they'd been fucking around with Midgard for ages. But okay, so he's the bad dude that kills Coulson. And then he gets killed in a vaguely brave act. I think that could have been handled better. But this is a guy who, never got dad's approval and was incredibly jealous of his brother. Gee, I wonder why. Ended up being mind controlled at a weak moment, became Norse god Hitler. But then it turned out that he was not only controlled by the Mind Stone, he was being manipulated by Thanos. But then he splits and he has to deal with what he's done. And they're all calling him a narcissist and this, that, and the next thing. A lot of the things he doesn't. I mean, oh, he's such a narcissist. Let's make him fall in love. Problem there. Big problem there. But instead of actually having him walk through and doing the sort of It's a Wonderful Life thing I thought they were going to do when I saw those production stills with all the Lokis, they did this bullshit like Hansel and Gretel thing with him and Sylvie, and it was almost like a Doctor Who weird thing. And I won't get into all the reasons that Sylvie's a problem, but then at the end, you know, the best part of the whole thing, the stealth introduction of, well, a version of Kang the Conqueror, and it discovered the world, it is revealed it was a golden timeline. Anyone that stepped out of line from Kang's plan was pruned, right? You were not allowed to step. You were not allowed to step out. So everything Loki did was not of his free will, right? He was a puppet. Now, if you're a narcissist, you can't cope with that. That would have been complete fucking, you know, narcissist ego right there. And even as it is, there was no, wait, you mean none of this is my fault and I got blamed for all of it and my life has been miserable because you decided it was so? The fuck is this? We didn't get that. It was, let's wait a second. Let's just think about this. Like that's not real emotion. That was actually the moment where you could have actually gone, all right, there's a path back for this character. But instead it's this stupid story about this weird projection of love onto this woman who is never really shown much. Like, it was just a mess.
And here's what frustrates me is it's like, okay, you want to give Loki a love interest. What's her name?
Sylvie. Oh, Sigyn from the stories. Yeah.
She's right there. And like, especially if you want to do a redemption. Now, the thing is, it wouldn't be a very feminist story.
Well,
but you could do this story of Loki finding Sigyn and they connect and he decides, I want to be better for her.
Well, and here's the reason that it could actually work done right. I mean, in the comics, it's a little bit creepy because it was straight out of Norse myth. And I mean, Loki's got two women. They're using the other one, Anga board, or I don't know how to pronounce the name, but I'm actually interested in what God of War is doing with this because they're introducing the other, who's the mother of monsters.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, sounds good, right? But Sigyn is the goddess of loyalty.
Yes.
And so she's tricked into marrying Loki and I'm gonna honor my commitments. And that would actually be a story that could bring him around because he's looking, they established in the Loki show, he's looking for someone to trust. He's looking for someone who trusts him.
Yeah. And the thing is, if they were going to do Sigyn, I want them to go full, soft, rose-scented feminine with her.
Oh, there's the perfect, she's blonde in the comics, but there's the perfect, you know, Renaissance painting, long flowing red hair.
Yeah.
You know, Marvel, I am available if you want to do this story. But it could work because I think it's more interesting to make Loki the product of child abuse, almost the ultimate fridge in the MCU. He's the fucking guy that has to be the asshole. He's the guy that has to do the shitty thing to move the plot along. And it would be really interesting if they could kind of, as a joke, get him sort of in carbon freeze somehow, and that's how he returns to main timeline. I don't know what's going to happen after. I think this season would have to be really excellent to bring him back in. Though, what's the point if they don't? Other than they wanted something that would guarantee to bring in numbers because the popularity of the character with men and women. But see, I think that would be an interesting twist on the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Because of the bad writing that happened with him, he just had to be the asshole dude. His character totally changes based on purpose. He's just the guy that does the shitty thing so someone can get hurt to move the plot along. And the realization that is what he is, I think really could change the character, because he get pissed off, right? Yeah. I'd get pissed off. I hate being used.
Yeah.
And he's a god. He's constantly saying, I'm a god. It's the Kratos problem. Okay, you've got all this power, but you were manipulated into powerlessness. Now what do? And what's the only move for a villain when they find out they've been used? The heel turn for a villain is redemption.
Yep.
But then he's got to figure out how to be good, which could be legitimately funny without, and you could do elements of bathos there so you get in the Marvel formula, but it could work and it could invert some of these tropes. And the other interesting thing The Boys does is they do this ongoing extended thing with a character you think is fridged but isn't, and then it really makes you challenged by how much this particular character was responsible for what happened to her. And there's an example, whereas if you take away that trope completely, if people just jump on that, then you don't get the unpacking of it. You don't get the ability to use it as a device to say something new. Because everybody, Song, everybody's got to use recognizable tropes.
Yeah.
There's just no way to write without them. It would take too long.
And there's nothing new under the sun. So it's like,
I think there are some new things, but
well, I mean, in general, it's like there's only so much new you can do. Like, we have personality types.
Well, and it's a change one thing rule too, right? You change too many things, you throw too many new things at the wall at once, the audience rejects it because they can't follow it. It's too much work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because, Marvel's doing that right now. Hey, we're going to do Fleabag meets Rick and Morty with She-Hulk. It's not a massive change. It's a borrowing of format, but we've never seen it in a superhero show before.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Ms. Marvel. Hey, we're going to do a teen superhero show, but we're going to talk about the partition of India. One new idea. That's it.
Yeah.
But it works because at least there's that one fresh thing. It's familiar enough that people are open to the message, to use the cliche. But they're knowingly, like, really hammering those teen tropes in order to soften the audience up enough, make it feel familiar, to do that. Really, I mean, that's a brutal part of history. And that is absolutely an example of a colonial power pitting one group of colonized people versus another group of colonized people, and millions of people were horribly murdered because of it. Yeah. That's a big swing. I mean, you could claim that that's possibly the biggest fridging in Marvel Comics so far. All those people got killed for the backstory of a teen superhero who makes glitter powers, who makes glitter ice.
I mean, part of the thing is, it's like you can do, this planet was genocided, but it's really hard for people to comprehend that.
Absolutely agree.
And like, even with, I don't know if we're allowed to say it on YouTube, what happened in Germany. There's people, it's like you can hear the numbers, but it's not until you see the walls covered in names.
Well, the phrase is, one person dying is a tragedy, millions dying is a statistic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like until you see the pile of eyeglasses or the shoes or the names on the wall or all this, it's hard to put into perspective that those numbers are people. And that's why so many stories, instead of, a city block was blown up or this happened, it's, no, someone who matters to the character was killed. And especially since like a lot of the old PIs in pulps and stuff like, and the noir stuff, it's, you never really heard about their parents, so you can't kill their parents.
That's right.
Most of the time they don't have a dog because they can't afford to feed them.
That's right.
And then most people don't want to see a dog die anyway. So, and there's no kids around, so you're left with the secretary or the girlfriend or the sexy lounge singer,
right,
or whoever been making eyes with.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, you put a woman in there because she adds a certain flavor to the story, and then you need to make the character sad.
Well, and it's also, let's face it, they usually choose a woman because of the presumption that she didn't do anything to deserve it.
And I think it does also come back to, like I said, she represents something besides the fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why they had to kill Maximus's wife, which is why they had to, you kill the woman because she's the safety. She represents peace and security.
Yeah, and that's the thing, going back to
yeah.
Like, so, going back to our Femme Fatale discussion, the Femme Fatales get killed off a lot in pulps, but it's usually because of a prior, it was that mob boss that caught up to them. It's usually a result of their choices, not the identity or the choices of the hero. And I think that I would add that is a major part of fridging, as opposed to something bad happened and the hero feels bad about it. I think that the entire reason the character gets killed, and the Kyle Rayner thing is an example of this, is just because she fell in love with the wrong guy.
Well, also, going back to the femme fatale dying in the pulps, not the pulps, in the noir especially, part of that probably comes back to the Hays Code.
Well, yeah. Well, and I mean, let's face it, rape is often used in fiction so you can show quote unquote sex and pass it off as violence. And that's a really grisly thing we need to confront. Yeah, well, I don't even know if YouTube would let us completely do the because it's automatically not advertiser friendly, and it really needs to be talked about. And I don't like when YouTube stifles conversations like this because advertisers don't like it. Well, come on, they do this on TV all the time. The exact same advertisers pay for it.